Hello and good afternoon. It is 4 o'clock on Wednesday, August 28th, 2024. This is a special meeting of the Los Altos City Council. This is our third districting meeting. So with that, let's go ahead and establish quorum. Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Liang.
Here.
Councilmember Fliger.
Here.
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Vice Mayor Daley.
Here.
Mayor Weinberg.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. With that, then, I will turn it over to staff.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly before I turn it over to the real experts, I did want to just mention a couple of things about tonight. So tonight is, as I think everyone is aware, is meeting number 3 in the districting process. The city is legally required to hold at least 5, so we're almost halfway there. This meeting is really intended to sort of be a starting point for reviewing the maps. You're going to hear from our consultants about the maps. This is really the first time anybody has had any chance to ask questions and to look at them and to provide feedback and input. But this is not the last time. We, over the next 4 weeks, are going to hold, it's not, I try to think of something that's faster than a sprint, but also longer than a marathon, because that's kind of what it is. It's just going to be a lot of community activities and events. We're going to hold several workshops, presentations to various community groups. We'll be at the farmers market, the libraries, grocery stores around town. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for members of the public to weigh in and provide input and feedback on the maps, all of which will lead us to September 24th, when we'll have meeting number 4 before the City Council and really get the start to coalesce a lot of the feedback and get some direction on what maps we want to go forward.
Let me interrupt you before you. Whoop.
Got it. Okay, we're good.
But before you go on to make introductions, one question. If a member of the public wanted to give input or suggest a community of interest or a map, but was unable to go to any of these meetings that you are setting up, how would the member of the public do that?
That is a great question. So there's multiple ways that individuals can do that, and maybe covered in the actual formal presentation here in a minute. But we have an email address, which is districts plural at losaltosca.gov, where anyone can email in comments. There's several places on the city's website, which again will be shown later, in which individuals can submit comments and thoughts, and then of course can reach out to city staff with their thoughts and their ideas.
Thank you.
So with that, I will turn it over to Elizabeth, who will give the presentation.
I'm just sharing my screen now. Hopefully you all can see it. They won't. Okay. There we go. All right, so my name's Liz Stitt. I'm with Redistricting Partners. We're your demographers for this districting. Today we're going to go over the draft map. So on today's agenda, we're going to go over the required districting criteria that we use in this process. We'll go over the public maps that were submitted, and then go over the draft maps that we created based off of those public maps. And then we'll get into the public hearing schedule. As he mentioned, there are multiple steps here. So we have the meetings, and then we have...
I'm sorry for you interrupting you, Elizabeth. Members of the public, I'd like to make a request that everyone turn off their phones if you haven't already done so. And I'm sorry to be a nudnik, but the room has been recently redesigned, and the curvature up here, it's designed so that the 5 of us who sit up here can easily hear what's being said down below. So whispers and things like that. I know it's not it's not intended to be disruptive, but we really do hear everything up here, and we hear it quite loudly. So if you need to talk, I would invite you, please go to the foyer or outside. Again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be grumpy about this, but it really is distracting. So thank you very much. I'm sorry. Please continue.
No worries.
Mr. Mayor, continuing your interruption, I forgot one thing, which is for the members of the public who are in attendance, we do have copies of the maps and the packets. Make sure you grab all three, because there are three different ones.
Great. We'll go over the public hearing schedule and then what's next. So you all saw this last time. This is the criteria that we use specifically in the state of California under the Fair Maps Act. The first criteria when we look at drawing maps is each district needs to be relatively equal in size. And that's a 10% or less total deviation. Then it needs to be contiguous, so they need to be whole pieces, not going from one part of the city to the other and saying that's District 1. Maintaining communities of interest, so identifying those like-minded communities with similar policy interest and trying to keep them together as much as possible. Identifying logical boundaries, so things that are like main thoroughfares, creeks, rivers, mountains, things like that. And then keep districts compact. So really we're trying to avoid bypassing a nearby population for a more distant one if the nearby population is similar to the one you're looking at. So the public maps that were submitted, we had 11 that met the deadline. These were submitted on Districtor, and I'm happy to show folks how to use that in today's presentation. It's a very handy tool, very happy that we had 11 submissions so far, and very much encourage the public to continue submitting on Districtor. These maps demonstrated different trends in their submissions. How they use main roads as dividers, how they divide the southern portion to the west of the freeway, and then of course there were some protest maps as well. So the first one is focused on the northern part of the city. So you can see all of these maps use San Antonio Road as a divider. Either entirely as a divider or partially, but that definitely is identified as a main road that we could use as a divider. And then a compact Southern Los Altos election district. We also received feedback from a community of interest submission saying that that area in the south is part of a school district, so it was logical to them to keep that together. And then, of course, protest maps. So clearly, the public has expressed concern with going to districts. Not only were these maps submitted, but many of the maps that were districted were also entitled things like don't go to districts, no districts, or ranked choice would be better. So when we crafted the draft maps, we based them off of the publicly submitted maps. We wanted to use a starting point from the public and then get it to a point where it's legally compliable. So making sure they follow the Fair Maps Act requirements. The first one is based off of ID number 246303, really focusing on using main roads as dividers. B uses ID 246722 as a template, making that compact election district with a unique way of splitting the highway. And then C uses ID 24779 as a template, really showing a different way of dividing the northern part of the city and allowing the southern portion of, the southern portion of the highway in North Los Altos to be maintained in District 2. So this is draft A. It has a total deviation of 8.2 3%. And as long as it's under 10% total deviation, it's assumed to be relatively equal in population. So it meets that criteria. It also uses San Antonio Road as a divider. And the map that we edited, our edit to this map was to use El Monte Avenue as a divider as well, along with adjusting it to make sure that it is within the population allowance. So here is map A. As you can see, it does use main roads, trying to make the streets as clean as possible. And then we go to the total deviation. The way we calculate total deviation is we take the highest populated district and the lowest populated district. We look at their percentage and add their percentages so that they are in an absolute value way. So here it's 8.3%. And then we have draft B. So edits were made to, again, one of the draft maps are submitted from the public, really showing a different way of splitting the northern part of the district. Total deviation here is 7.2%. And you can see here, this has a different configuration as compared to draft A when you look at the District 1 here. And I can always renumber these as well. All of the numbering right now is arbitrary. We could have said A, B, C, D. You'll be deciding, in addition to voting on a map, you'll be voting on numbering and sequencing as well. So you get to decide what the numbers are. Again, when we look at the total deviation, it's under that 10%, so it's 7.2 here. And then we go to draft C. So this one, again, uses main roads as much as possible. It takes a public map and brings it into compliance under the Fair Maps Act. The southwest portion of the highway in North Los Altos is entirely in District 2 this time. So it's a different way of looking at how to divide the city into election districts. Total deviation, 5.5%. And it gives you a different way of looking at the top district, so District 1 here. Does it make more sense that it's a vertical or a horizontal split? Our goal of showing you all draft maps is to show you options and to get an idea of what you like and what you don't like. So any kind of feedback is really important in these early stages. And then again, total deviation is 5.5%. So the draft maps that I just showed you, these are the first of many iterations. Tonight is just kicking off the draft map portion. So by law, the first two meetings need to be pre-map meetings. So focused on collecting community of interest data, marketing, making sure the public is aware, and having an education campaign. So now we're in the second part of this districting effort. It is post-map. So the maps that I showed you really are just a kicking off point with the intention of being edited. So all of those draft maps that we went over, you can pick one or two or throw them all out. Entirely up to you. You can give me new direction on what kind of maps you want to see. And all of those draft maps, including the public maps, are all on Districtor and can be edited by the public if they want to use any of those maps as a template. And I can show you all how to do that. So as I mentioned, today is the first meeting of the post-map meetings. The next opportunity throughout the month of September will be a ton of community events. Let me just go to that slide real fast. You can see starting September 3rd, they're going to have events at the Los Altos Community Center. They're going to be at the downtown farmers market. All the way, I mean, I think it's pretty much every week throughout September. When we go back to the districting schedule, then we're going to come back September 24th with the new maps that you all have directed us to draw, and we're going to have new maps that were submitted by the public. So we always encourage the public to submit maps, and you all have been doing a great job. And it's always great when the city councils choose a map drawn by the public. So just know that we're agnostic. We don't care if you go with our maps or not. We want you to choose the best map for your city. So what's next? Like I was mentioning, this is just this jumping off point. So what I'm looking for from you all tonight is direction on what kind of maps you want to see, what kind of configurations you liked and what you didn't like. And this goes for the public as well. I know that you'll have public testimony, and it would be really helpful to hear from the public on that part as well. And then suggest possible changes, or even suggest throwing out a map or two or three. And then provide us with direction on what you want to see next time. That is the end of the presentation, and I know you'll need to open this up to the public as well, but I'm also happy to show you how to use Districtor as well.
Thank you. Well, why don't we go ahead and take you up on that offer so that people can be a little bit more familiar with it if they haven't yet tried to play with it.
Absolutely. So this is a great tool, super intuitive. This was created by researchers at Tufts University. They've since moved, but they're researchers who want the public to be engaged in redistricting efforts. So this was made specifically for the public to join in what previously was a difficult way of participating. So when we, and the website, it's districtr.org/tag/Los_Altos. You can also find it on the website, the city's website for their districting efforts. When we scroll down, there are two options for drawing maps. One is to draw districted maps, and then the other is to draw communities of interest. So I'll go ahead and click on the, this presentation will probably take 5-10 minutes. So when I'm just gonna move some things around on my computer. When I look at, obviously, this is the city, this is your boundaries. This was created specifically for the city of Los Altos. There are 4 buttons up here. This hand allows you to drag the map around, and when you scroll in, I scroll in with my mouse, but you can also use this plus minus sign to go in and out. And when you go over to the paintbrush, obviously that's what allows you to draw the districts. I also want to point out that we're using census blocks here, and that is the smallest census designation that the census gives us. So the geography, the US Census is more than just the numbers, it's also geography. So we have to use these census blocks as well. So I think it's incredibly useful for the public to see these census blocks, because sometimes they can look a little funny. I know that there's some in the south that looked like that is one census block. So it's really helpful for people to see how these blocks are configured. And then what we're trying to do is meet this ideal size here. So an ideal size would be just over 6,000 people. If you drew too much, you can always delete using the eraser button. And then this magnifying glass allows you to hover over and just get a sense of the population within an individual census block. When we want to draw another district, all we have to do is click on another color. Very intuitive. What I recommend for the public is to click the already drawn district, like lock that down so you don't draw over what you just drew. To show you, if I didn't do that, I would start drawing over the blue. So recommend hitting locked, and then you would just draw until you hit that population ideal size in accordance with what you think is best. And then when it comes to the total deviation, there is one quirk about this that I just want people to know, is the total deviation is the highest and lowest population difference and the combination of the two. This program only shows the highest or lowest. It doesn't show the combination. So when you're looking at the max population deviation over here, just know that that's only half of it. So the highest, this would be hovering over it, it tells you. So this is negative 18.5%. Clearly, it needs to be much low or higher than that, but that's 18.5%. And then when we look at the other one, it's negative 6.5%. So when you're drawing, just make sure that you're adding them up or you're keeping the maximum deviation to 5% or less. And then that'll ensure that you have a balanced map. Once you're happy with how it looks, actually before we get there, I do want to point out that you have the ability to look at population sizes and citizen voting age population, which is a very critical part of districting. It's the other data set that we use every time we draw a map. So it shows you the different demographics within the city, which may be helpful when you're drawing. And then once you're happy with how it looks, you would just hit save. And then you can always save it and come back to it as a work in progress. That would not be considered public testimony, but it does give you the ability to come back and work on it and submit it when you feel that it's comfortable. And then share now, you would type in either a name or a theme of your map. You don't have to name it after yourself, but it's always encouraged. And then hit share to the gallery. So that's how you draw a districted map. And then I'll just quickly show you how to use the community of interest. This is particularly helpful in knowing where communities are, obviously, so we don't inadvertently split them up. So all you have to do is, same buttons, they do the same thing, you can move them around. This brush, you'll notice that it looks different now. Now you're encouraged to draw your community. Let's just say that's a community. And then you would name it, what that community is, and then describe why it's important to keep this community together. So maybe you could say this is like your micro neighborhood. You all have a neighborhood association. You would prefer to be kept together, etc. And then you also have the option of putting it in an important place. All you have to do is hit this blue button and put it in an important place. Maybe it's your local park where you guys congregate. And then you can add as many of them as you want. Oh, go back. You would just go back to the brush and then add another color. You can add as many as you want, so long as you think that's helpful. And then again, you would just save it, name it after a theme or yourself, and then hit share now. I do want to say that when you share, it's immediately public testimony, which is incredibly useful. We get it instantly, but it also means that you should make sure that that's the map, or those are the maps that you want to submit. And with that, are there any questions about Districtor?
Just to confirm, once you hit save and it's public testimony, that means that anyone can then go to the website and look at the map that you created, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And since I'm on this is one of the draft maps, and I just want to show you guys how to adjust it. All you have to do is click on one of the maps. It doesn't have to be a draft map. It could be any map. And then you can go in and start editing it yourself. So if there's something that you like about a map, but you're like, it needs to keep this neighborhood together, maintain these areas, you can make those small changes. And it could be helpful just for you to know, like, what would happen if you make those changes. So even making that small adjustment totally throws off that population. And then when you save it, you can save it yourself once you're happy with how you made the adjustment, and then hit share to the gallery, and it's a completely new map. It does not change the map that was there previously, and it saves as a new map with a new unique number, so we'll be able to track it throughout the process. So that is how you use
Okay.
Districtor.
Thank you very much for that. And I just want to add on so the public knows, when using the tool, the paintbrush tends to want to click on multiple census blocks with every click. So sometimes you're getting more than you really want. If that's a problem when you're using it, you have to zoom. Sometimes you have to zoom in really, really close to make sure that you're not clicking more blocks than you intend, or to make some fine adjustments.
And to that point, you can adjust the brush size as well. So when you go back to the colors, you can see brush size, and then this is size 20, so that'll click 20-ish blocks at a time. If you want to just select one or a couple at a time, just really refine it down to a smaller number, and it allows you to get far more specific. If you want to draw a bunch at the same time, pump it up to 100, draw the whole city.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have anything else from staff?
No.
Okay. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, let me go ahead and start with a few questions I have. Have you identified any communities of interest yet?
So from what I've seen on Districtor, there has been at least a school district that has been submitted. I believe I mentioned that in the presentation. So really focusing on which school districts are a very common agency to use with other agencies. So I know that that's at least one, but hopefully we'll get more discussion tonight from the public on their communities of interest.
Okay, so you are relying entirely upon our community to suggest communities of interest.
That's right.
What feedback did you get from our last meeting, and how was any of that incorporated into the maps we have today?
Well, I mean, at the last meeting, unfortunately, I couldn't attend, but I did watch the it was like 2-3 hours. And I think the biggest lesson that I took from that was really listening to the public and trying to assuage some of their concerns on the districting process. I really want the public to know that this is controlled by the residents and the city council. So In terms of the maps, again, this is a starting off point. It was important for us to base them off of publicly submitted maps and making sure that they were in line with the law. So any changes we made were only to make sure that they followed the law.
Okay, thank you. In looking at all three of the maps, I noticed that your suggested boundaries all keep the Highlands District together, but they all chop up the Grant Park neighborhood. And I'm wondering if there was a reason for that.
No particular reason. What we really tried to do was follow main roads as much as possible. So what we can do is pull up some of the maps, and you can tell me where you want to see the adjustments. That would be actually incredibly helpful.
Okay. Okay, I will look to my colleagues who would like to go. Councilmember Meadows.
I'm like Pete was last night, wanting to talk. So, and unlike you, Mayor, I am grumpy today. So with that preamble, so I want to follow up on the tool. And you talked about a school district as a community of interest. Does that pre-populate, or are we supposed to know the boundaries of that school district when we define it in the map?
We know you would have to know the school district boundaries, but it's also helpful for us to know, is that the kind of boundaries that you want. So we're not going to have all the boundaries. We do look for the public to let us know, hey, these are important agencies.
Right,
outside.
but you're assuming the public knows the boundaries. I mean, we each know what school district we're in, but we don't necessarily know the boundaries. So this tool doesn't help us, and we're going to be guessing at the boundaries if a school district is part of our community of interest.
So one of the things that we can do is, with your direction, is we can look at different boundaries and add them to Districtor. So we can take the school district boundaries and request that Districtor includes them, and then people can see those boundaries.
Okay, I think that would be helpful because I couldn't draw a boundary even, knowing that I'm in it. So what we have in front of us, the package didn't have the information that you relied on as one of the criteria for determining whether this is compliant or not, and that's the total deviation, which, if I understood it, is the difference between the highest and the lowest population numbers or something.
Yeah.
Well, it would be good to see that what the definition of that deviation is, rather than, I don't think how I describe it can possibly be the definition, but we also didn't have that information in front of us when looking at this. So I think it would be helpful. Does the tool spit out the deviations? I think you said it did.
Yeah.
Okay, but
And-
yeah.
And I can show you, let me go ahead and share my screen again. And I can show you what I'm talking about when I say deviation. Okay, so this is draft C. You're going to get two data sets whenever I give you maps. You're going to get the 2020 census data, you're going to get CVAP population. These are used for two different things, both very important. The CVAP data is what we use to ensure we're following the Federal Voting Rights Act. The 2020 census data, that's what we use to determine population balance. So you can see there are two numbers highlighted. Can you guys see it?
No.
Is it not? They got it? Okay. Okay. So there are two numbers that are highlighted. It's kind of hard for the public to see, but hopefully you have the maps, the handouts.
They're in the third row, if that helps you. The third row from the top, you'll see one in the third column and one in the fifth column.
So the deviation, when we're talking about balanced population, if we were to take the average of the city's population, divided by 5, the ideal size would be, what was it, 6,333. The deviation numbers here in that third row or column, no row, that is how far away from the ideal size you are. For example, District 2 is 3.7% away from the ideal size. 4 is 1.8% away from the ideal size. And how we figure out the total deviation is you just combine the absolute value of the highest and the lowest populated districts, and that tells you the total deviation.
Okay, so in this case, it's actually 5.5%.
That's correct.
It's on both sides of the zero axis. So 5.5% is the number here. Okay, thank you. Very helpful. That leads me to my next question is, why do we look at the census data when we're trying to figure out voting districts? Why aren't we using the CVAP population? You've got 20, 30% of kids in these numbers. They don't vote. So why aren't we building the districts on the CVAP and that deviation?
So it's a constitutional issue. So by law, by the Constitution, we have to use the census data. That's a requirement for all jurisdictions throughout the country. And there has been Supreme Court cases that looked at that exact question. And the Supreme Court came back and said, no, you have to use total census data, not just CVAP, to balance your districts. So good question. It went straight to the top of the judicial system, and they answered it for you.
That's very helpful. I won't argue with them then. Very expensive to argue with them. So another question is I think you answered this already, but let me say it again to make sure that I'm clear. The only community of interest reflected here is a school district based on people defining the boundaries of that district themselves. All the rest of it is roads.
That's so far what I've received. I don't know if anyone from the city has received any additional emails or anything like that.
Okay. And then I want to ask, so I was trying to do my own analysis and I hit a roadblock, which is why I'm cranky. And that was, and maybe there's a reason for it, so I'm asking you the reason. I understand that we get to define which district is 1 or A or kangaroo or whatever we want to call our districts. But in these comparisons you've drawn, if you go top to bottom, the top 2 districts have a different number in each of the scenarios. So I was trying to compare the district I live in because I thought I could understand what's happening to that in each of your draft scenarios. And I found I had to look more carefully. I couldn't pick all the District 1s because District 1 is a different geography in each of these 3 drafts. Was there a reason that happened?
I think, and let me go back to, I think it was draft B that had a switch in, and that was because I started with that middle portion. So the numbers are drawn according to when you draw them. So I started out with the middle portion first and then created 2. So what I can do is come back and renumber that so that it looks more like the other draft maps. The numbers are totally arbitrary at this point.
Now, I understand that, but there's the only area, number 3, which is red. So if I wanted to compare logically, I would compare all the reds. And for number 3, they would be the same. But that's the only of the 5 districts that's the same in all of those. So I think it would be helpful to be able to compare what happens to each district. Because right now, all we're doing is drawing roads. So I think in the long term, I'm hoping that you will have the capability to allow us to compare the topmost, however we define it, with the next, with the middle, et cetera. And I realize I'm branching into commentary now, but this is part of my frustration. So I think I've asked the questions that I have for now, so I will yield it back to you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Is there a district in any of the map drafts in which there is a majority minority?
No,
And are we able to achieve a majority minority in any district?
no.
What's the closest that we can come to that?
I would have to check, but I know that one of the maps that was drawn was at least 38% Asian CVAP, which is a very influential Asian CVAP district. But I can go back and investigate how high it could be.
I would be very interested in understanding which of the drafts creates the highest percentage for that district. That's the only question I have right now, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Flagger?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the presentation, and thanks for being here in person. I do think it makes a difference. So I'll start with following up on a lot of the questions Councilmember Meadows asked, because I had similar questions where I looked at the 3 draft maps, and it wasn't clear to me how you arrived at those drafts. There wasn't any explanation. And so it was very helpful hearing that one of the primary resources was looking at what the residents submitted. And I understand that, but it's also concerning because for me, because the basis of this, in addition to all the legal requirements about being contiguous, same number of population, communities of interest is a part of that. And so I guess what I was looking for is more of a description of what the communities of interest you are basically trying to put together in these different districts. And so you mentioned that you watched our last meeting, and there are a list of communities of interest mentioned, and actually jotted them down. And I'm curious if when you were developing these 3 draft maps, if you considered them and if you could help point out, apart from the school district, which was one of them to your point, but it wasn't the only one. And so I'm trying to understand, was that, because we talked about business districts, there's some communities that prefer sidewalks and no lights, Loyola Corners, wanted to stay together. We had the El Camino Real corridor. So there were all these things that were mentioned. And I know for some of the districts, they don't capture that. And I don't know if that was factored into when you were drafting the 3. And I know we're at the beginning stages.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. No, these were based off of public maps. So what we can do today is look at the public maps, and you guys know the communities of interest better than I do. So we can adjust the maps or throw out the maps entirely, and you can tell me, keep these communities together, these are the roads, et cetera. So the draft maps that I submitted were just a jumping off point. So by no means are they final, and they're intended to be reactive to input. So we can adjust any of the maps or throw them out per your direction, the City Council's direction.
And similar to the question about, can you give us guidance about what the lines would look like if you want to keep certain school communities together, because we don't know these streets. As a matter of fact, some of these draft districts don't go into that level of detail where you see some of the side streets. Are you also able, if, for example, we want to see if each district is at least, is at least 1 mile from one of our, so there are 5 districts. We have 7 primary business districts. If we, for example, wanted to make sure that at least in each district, it's within 1 mile of at least one business district, that's something you'd be able to help us with.
Yes.
Okay. And then we know Mr. Maginot plans to be on the road every day in September working on this for us. Will anybody from your team be engaged? Like, how will what Mr. Maginot is learning being communicated to you? Because it's one thing if we have a meeting and you watch the video and hopefully you take notes and you incorporate it. But if Mr. Maginot is doing the show, going to farmers markets and having workshops, I want to make sure that you're getting that input and it's being factored in. So how is this going to work?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled that you all got to meet my new best friend for the month of September. We're going to be in constant contact with each other. It's not fair and it's not cost effective to ask them to be at every single event that we are doing. And so when we have an event, we'll certainly be communicating of here's the things that we heard, here's the suggestions, here's the questions. Of course, we have our district webpage, which we continue to update. And so when we are hearing questions, we'll put them on the frequently asked questions and we'll pass them along, get answers from both of my best friends, which the other one's over here.
Kimon is everybody's best friend. And so following up on that communication, and thanks, Mr. Majour, I appreciate trying to save us every dollar possible and not having them at every event. Let's say you get, 20 different draft maps with different input. How do you as a consultant then put together draft maps? Are you, for the next meeting, will we see 15 draft maps for us to consider? Like, what's your process to then narrow down the focus of, based on what you've heard, I've heard 20 different things, but this is how we think it should be pulled together.
Yeah.
Just here are the options.
So when it comes to the public submitting maps, we're looking at all of the maps and we're giving you all of their maps. So you should have received all of the public maps. You had the ability to view it like the draft maps. And I really want to encourage you to think about public maps as potential draft maps, like on an equal level, because they could easily be selected as a final map. So what we're going to do is make sure you all receive the draft maps 7 days in advance to the next meeting. That is a requirement. Hopefully we'll get it to you sooner, but if there are any maps submitted by the public on Districtor, we'll get that to you so long as it makes the 7-day requirement. In terms of whittling it down, that unfortunately is a really hard job that you all have to do. So you'll be having discussions on which maps you like and which maps you don't like. When I come back with new draft maps, that's because that's a request that the city council had. So you'll tell me, you like draft A, but you want to see this split differently. So you'll give me instructions and we can even pull it up on Districtor today. And we can look at what the differences look like when you give that instruction. And then we'll come back and turn it around. We usually get it back pretty quickly for a draft map. So you'll have the draft maps available to you so you can review them, have your thoughts, and even draw something on Districtor if you want as well.
So based on this heavy reliance on the maps the public submits, and I was looking at the tool last night, where the comments section that you have, it's not required before submission. Mm-hmm. Right? And so yes, residents can go in that comment section and explain why they drew the lines the way they did and what they view as the communities of interest. But we also have maps where, putting aside the protest maps, we also have maps where they didn't really explain why they thought certain communities should be together. Is there a way in the tool to force that? Because I think it will actually help me, not just looking at maps with colors and trying to get in the head of residents, which we should never try to do, but trying to understand why they picked a certain district. Are we able to do that with the tool? I don't know if that would require any special customization, but to force them to say,
Right.
Before you submit your map, why did you pick these communities to be part of the same district? And if not, Mr. Majour, I hope as part of whatever forms get filled out, that's one of the questions.
So it's not a requirement. I don't think that would be possible to enforce that. You don't even need to, it's not a requirement to ask for people's names when they submit testimony. So asking them to submit, why they drew a map wouldn't be reasonable for every single map. But I will tell the public that it is immensely helpful to get that kind of information. It is going to make it more likely that the city council will understand and possibly continue with your map. So it's also why I tell people to really consider when they save and share the map that is the map that they want, because you don't want to be submitting 10, 20 maps and then dilute all of the maps. You want to pick a map and submit it and tell us why.
Right, exactly.
It's also really helpful if you're, in your neighborhood, your community, if you all, this has happened in other cities where you all get together and draw a map, and that is your coalition map. So you can think of this kind of as like democracy in action. It really is getting your residents together, drawing a map that you all can support, and the more support from the public is always helpful in guidance.
And then last question, Mayor, just want to clarify. So at the next meeting, will you have X number of proposed draft maps like today? Or for what I'm hearing, at the next meeting, you won't. We will only be reviewing all the draft maps or proposed maps submitted by the public.
So you'll be telling me this afternoon what kind of direction you want. So you can tell me, I want to see a map that splits, this in a different way. And again, you can either go off of the draft maps, go off of a public map, or tell me to create an entirely new map. So the amount of draft maps for next time depends on you all and what direction you want to go.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Liang.
Thank you again for that demonstration and that tutorial. I tried it. I had difficulty, but I'm going to go back and try it again based on you walking us through it. So thank you for that. I understand how important it is to keep the school district, Cupertino, Fremont Union High School District together. Unfortunately, that's going to be too large. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've seen that in your experience. Help us understand if it's just a small portion that's going to be eliminated. Explain how you think it would be best to try to, address that.
Yeah, and let me pull up Districtor. So I don't want to tell you guys what's best. I think hearing from the public in terms of how to split things up is usually incredibly helpful for us demographers, because we're just here to make sure that we're drawing within the law and assessing and educating and empowering the public and you all on making the right legally correct decisions, right? So I'm going to share my screen again so we can take a look at that community of interest that was submitted. So this is the school district. When we look at the evaluation of it, it's over 7,000. So it would need to lose about 1,000 people. And that's one of the discussions that we hopefully will have today is how would you make that southern portion of the city? Is this the kind of shape you want to see in a city council district? And then how would you potentially get it down to 6,000? You can follow a main road, but does that make sense? So that's 6,800. We'd still have to lose a little bit more. So that could be a change, but does that make sense? Does that follow, your experience living within the city? Is it breaking up neighborhoods, et cetera?
Yeah, so. It is breaking up. Yeah, it is breaking up a neighborhood. So following Grant and Fremont, I'd keep that whole section together, like you got right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then possibly take off the side past Eva, I guess. off the other side. No, on the left-hand side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's harder. Yeah, it's hard. Well, I'd keep some of that to make it 6,000, right, you said? How would you keep 6,000? Okay, so it's understandable, but now we're seeing how it's going to be done, but unfortunately, you just can't keep a whole school district together.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's something we're going to have to try to adjust. In the maps, as you go out, so I think it's more for the assistant city manager. As you go out and bring these large maps together, I think what's helpful is, as we're not only looking at school district, is like plotting out the elementary and the middle schools. I think it's important because people try to stay together within not just school districts, but school boundaries. So if we can highlight those, that would be great. And also showing the parks, if we could highlight the parks in each community. So when you have the maps, like you did the redistrictor, unfortunately, all those things don't seem to pop up.
Okay.
So if they can pop up, that would be great.
So if the parks make all the sense in the world, the school districts, I would be concerned that we are communicating to the public, you must use this as a firm boundary. When we talked about the Cupertino Union School District at our last meeting, there was an open question of, does that community want to be grouped together, or do they think that they would have more influence with the city council if they were divided into two districts? That was an open question, as opposed to having just 1 out of 5 council members representing almost the entire school district. Would it be better for them to be spread out in 2 so they have 40% of the council as opposed to 20% of the council? If we're putting in lines that mark school districts or any other logical grouping of people, can we do it in such a way that it's clear that this is there for informational purposes, but it's not a requirement? Because I think a lot of people will see that line and say, okay, so I have to put this together, when that's not necessarily the case.
No, when we have suggested boundaries on Districtor, you have to go in and opt in to use that boundary. So they would have to, and I'll show you again, 1 second. When we do upload the boundaries, it will be here, let me actually go to the, okay. So this is a districted map. This is under you go to data layers. And then in here, we don't have any boundaries yet, but there will be a little, sentence saying like boundaries that you can use. One of them could be the school district, another could be some kind of like neighborhoods.
So can you have a toggle switch? So if I want to see the school
Yeah.
district boundaries, I can toggle it on. If I don't want to see it, I can toggle it off?
Exactly. So
Okay.
you have to toggle it on at first. Regardless, when you click on a map to start drawing, the option will be off. You have to opt into it to see it.
Thank you.
So, like they were saying, you can't see the boundaries. So in a sense, it's good because you're going at it with an open mind and you can create your own boundaries. But I think what happens is, it is nice to know where the schools and the parks are located because those are definitely communities of interest. Just highlighting them would be helpful. So I think that as we go out and we go to share the maps at these locations, that'll be helpful. We're not stating that the boundaries are going to be based that way. We're just sharing what people have in common, and of course, that's a community of interest. So I know that one of the examples that Paul Mitchell gave was pickleball. I mean, everybody all over the city loves pickleball, and it's too hard to draw, a boundary based around that. So I, I just think it's helpful because as we guide individuals to try to find some commonality, that would be helpful. And earlier, I think, no, one of the encouraged criteria is to try to stay within the main road lines, right? But it's not, sometimes you can't adhere to that. So, and we're allowed to break it up, right? So if we're gonna go back to that district, for example, can you pull it up?
Yeah.
And for example, like you had done earlier, you divided the highlands, which you unfortunately, the top part of the pink or the bottom part of the pink, it's going to be divided up. You just can go straight up the road from Grant Road, right? And then that'll be a clear demarcation, but it's not based on roads. So you fill that area in. Oh yeah, it's hard to explain.
So here,
Yeah, fill that area in, that's right.
She doesn't know the names of the
Oh, yeah, okay. And then okay. You can see Grant Road. I see Grant.
yeah,
Okay,
Grand Road.
Councilmember, I mean,
You
do
can
you have
go
a
see Grant
question,
Road,
or
but
are you
it's
trying to
okay.
make?
It's okay to just not follow a road, but to go straight up, correct?
So, yeah, and remember, we're following the Fair Maps Act requirements, and it is a ranked list of criteria. So the first criteria is it has to be relatively equal in population. And I think that following main roads is like third or fourth.
Okay.
So there are other prioritized criteria over main roads.
That's clear, thank you. And then all these clear, can we have, somehow, when we do these, like these, on this districtor, we need to be reminded of the criterias. How do we make sure that they pop up to make sure that we have the priority of the criterias we're addressing?
We do have a little blurb at the front, so at least this reminds people this is the criteria that we're using and that you should be using when you're drawing a map.
Okay, so if suppose we're dropping a map and we're not, if we want to stay more aligned with something, it won't pop up that you should try to do this. Okay, so there's no pop-ups that occur to try to remind you to steer you one way.
That's right.
Okay, wonderful. So I greatly appreciate your guidance on this, and thank you again for everything.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to public comment. I'd like to do what we did last time. Instead of having timed public comments, I'll just give people enough time to say their piece. I think that worked really well. So, Madam City Clerk, I will turn it over to you to call commenters.
The first speaker is Allison Aldrich.
First, I want to say thank you so much to the City Council for all of your work on this, and thank you for giving us a tutorial. Super helpful. Had two questions and two comments. The first question is, and I'll just say them all. The first one is, if the CVRA gets changed, and what I consider the unintended consequence of it is what's happening here. If that gets changed, are we able to go back to at large? That's after we've done this work. That's number one. Number two is that I looked early on in the opportunity to see the public maps, and there were a handful at that time. And rather than create one, I saw one that I liked, and I wanted to do a +1. So if that could be part of the software, that would be awesome, rather than redrawing the same thing and diluting. And then a couple of friends had some points that had asked me to share. And one of them was, would it make sense in order to keep the El Camino corridor together? Could that be part of a of a district? And then could the base maps be updated with, and we sort of discussed this already, elementary, secondary, and high school boundaries? And that's all. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I will look to staff for answers to the questions, please.
In terms of the legislation, it would be wholly dependent on what the legislation says. Sometimes statutes are retroactive, sometimes they're not. So it'll just depend what the legislature does. And I'm sure those who are lobbying the legislature are probably asking that it be retroactive in some sense to allow cities to make changes.
And then when it comes to supporting a map, I think it's wonderful if there's a map that's already drawn and you support. You can email us, or tonight you can let us know which map, so it's on public record on which map you prefer. Or you can go into Districtor, and then the map that you like, you can just resave but name it I support map ID number. So we know that's the map that you prefer. So you have a few options on how you want to communicate that.
But there's no way to do an easy like or +1.
There isn't,
thumbs up.
and
Okay.
we're going to be meeting with Districtor when they're going to revamp their application for the next redistricting cycle, and I think that's a great idea. I haven't heard that before.
And then school district boundaries, we already talked about. Thank you for bringing that up. The ECR corridor, maps can be drawn to keep it together. I have heard people say the ECR corridor should not be kept together because it's not just one district. So keeping the ECR corridor is something that if that's something you think is important, you can create a community of interest to communicate that to us. And if you're creating maps, you can show that. But as the council has gotten feedback contrary to that, I don't think it's something that we would lock in.
The next speaker is Eric Steinley.
It's been so long since we've seen each other. I have a suggestion, John. The Iditarod. Bunch of dogs running through difficult conditions and a bunch of guys running beside them doing very little to help. Leave that to you. I just come up with the big ideas. I don't worry about how to put them into effect. I'm the guy that doesn't like splitting up El Camino Real. And I do have a suggestion. If I were to choose, it would be either A or B. Since I live at the tippy top point at the very top, either I get downtown or I don't get downtown, depending on which one we choose. And I don't really care whether I get downtown or not. I do have some thoughts about some of the ways we might think about this. One of the reasons I don't think that we should use El Camino Real as a single district is that, for one thing, it tends to ghettoize El Camino Real, and I think that's a very bad thing. Number two, nobody gets excited about Petco and Walgreens, which is what you find along there. And there are real differences of interest between those who are on the west side and those who are on the east side of El Camino Real. So I think apart from the obvious, which is it's a single street, I don't think there's anything that argues in favor of that. But I would like to offer a thought about a community of interest that might make some sense, which is along the commercial neighborhood area. And I'm thinking about Rancho and Loyola Corners, whether they go into one or they get split into two. That's the kind of thing we should look at. Those are areas that we all know from meetings of the Planning Commission, of which I'm a member, and I'm not speaking there on that basis, which I keep forgetting to say. The people that live there identify with those areas and with the stores, and possibly with Woodland. I don't know that I'll let Lynette deal with that side of things, but that's another possibility. Nobody identifies with any commercial, and El Camino Real is no longer really a commercial thoroughfare. It's increasingly a residential thoroughfare. And to think of it that way, we have stores here and there, but all the interesting ones are on the other side of the street in Mountain View, frankly. So short of opening a bar, which might make it a community of interest, this is the Bedard initiative. Pierre Bedard stood up in front of the Planning Commission in 2018 and said the problem is Chili's closed and we don't have a bar anymore. And I stood up and said I second. But short of something like that, there isn't anything about El Camino Real that is going to make people identify with the area. It's a pass-through. I do like the idea, and I stood up in front of you and suggested, and I'm glad to see that two of the maps actually reflected this, using a vertical rather than a horizontal orientation, and obviously San Antonio is a good way to do that. The tricky bit, it seems to me, is the part between El Monte and Miramonte, and what you do with that area and the parts that are associated with it as you get up towards Foothill on that side. And I don't have any particular thoughts about that. People who actually live there will know what they want. I'd be just as bad at drawing the lines as anybody. So with that, those are my thoughts at this point. I don't have any detailed ideas, but I'm happy to see that it's going in, if I can say, the right direction. Okay. Oh, your classical language lesson for today. Criterion is a plural, criteria is a plural. It hurts my ears when I hear people say this criteria. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steinley.
The next speaker is Myra Orta.
Hello. Probably a lot of you know me. I'm up here whenever there's a controversy. And I've lived in this city probably longer than most anybody since 1972. It's a long time. And I just want to tell you, I know I may be a little late in my objection, but I'm going to give it anyway. This city, I am very proud to live here because we're heterogeneous and we get along. And we don't need to be divisive. We don't need to divide ourselves up. You know, next door is an Italian family. They lived there 50 years. We live in our place 52 years. 2 doors down is a great Indian family. The boys there took care of the fish in our pond. And across the street are Chinese families. What is this thing of dividing people up? It's wrong. And I don't think we should acquiesce. I'm kind of a fighter. I come from New York. And when we don't like something, we say something about it. And like Michelle Obama said, do something about it. You know, in my opinion, all these cities, I have notes, but I know what I want to say. In our own household, my husband's Latino and I'm a Jew. We don't fight often. At least we know how to make peace. You know? I mean, this is silly. The whole thing is silly. I've never seen any discrimination against Chinese people like this so-called lawyer from Malibu. I think the guy's crazy. You know, he's getting rich on this. Every time he sends a letter, he gets money. Anytime any city sues him, he gets money. He's what you call an ambulance chaser. Okay, what I propose is that all the cities who are objecting, and I know Los Altos objects to this, we all get along, we don't need this. Santa Clara objected. Santa Monica objected. There are many cities who've objected, and why can't we all work together, all these cities who object to this stupid rule, and try to work to get it revoked, or at least placed on the ballot, so Californians can vote. Let Californians vote about this. I appreciate all your efforts in the maps and the sections, but I really think it's misplaced energy. I think energy should go to coordinating with other cities in California who object to this stupid law and try to get it changed to be more in keeping with who we are. You know, if that lawyer has a problem in Malibu, maybe he should work on correcting it. But we don't have a problem in Los Altos. So that's my piece.
Sorta, thank you very much for your comment, and certainly I think you said a lot that most, if not everyone in the room, would agree with.
The next speaker is Lindsay P. Hi. Let's see. I have a few questions and a few comments. First, all of the maps seem to have 5 districts. I suppose that's because there's 5 of you. That seems rather arbitrary. If we don't like the districting process, which I also don't like, maybe we should try to have fewer districts just so we don't carve it up so much. Maybe we could have 3 districts. Maybe there's like a north, a south, and a middle. I don't know if we have to keep 5 city council members. If we could do some different number, we could do 3 districts times 2 council members per district is 6 council members. So I'm just trying to understand, like, why do they all have 5? What is the real requirement with respect to the number of districts? And again, I'm with the last person. I don't actually want to carve it up, so the fewer the better in my perspective. So that's just a comment. And then a couple other things. Regarding the school districts, so the reason I actually originally came here tonight is because I am in exactly one of those weird carve-outs where I live in that northwest section of the southernmost district. Which the northwest section just northwest of the southernmost district. So I am in the Cupertino Union Fremont High School district, but my district, as on all 3 of those maps, my district would not put me in there. It would put me in the purple one or the green one, depending on which map you're looking at. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if you got it. But I live near Grant Park. I'm in the Cupertino Union School District, and yet I would be grouped with a bunch of people who are not in that school district. So that worried me. I was like, okay, well, my interests are not going to be aligned with my voting members for the most part. And so I originally submitted a comment and wanted to say I really like to keep with my district. However, I'm also wondering, like, this is not going to impact my school district voting. Like, I still have a school district member who I will vote for, I assume. So then I started asking myself, well, why do I care about school districts? I care because of road safety. So those are things that the city controls where my kids have to walk to school, and I care about that kind of stuff. So that's something to think about. I'm not sure what else I care about. So I was hoping that maybe you guys could help me think through, like, with respect to school districts, as it's a big topic, what kind of things other than road safety is the city council even going to be doing? And maybe if we could kind of talk about that, the public would come to a conclusion of, like, oh, if it's really just roads, maybe we should look at districting more about roads. Or if it's really none of those, then maybe we can all put the school district thing to the side and say, okay, actually, the thing I came about, I actually don't care about. So I'm not sure. And then my last comment is regarding the submission process from the public. It seems like, as far as I could tell, I did use the map a bit before coming. And as far as I can tell, I could have submitted through 2,000 maps if I had wanted to, and called them all different things and claimed that I was Joe and Sally and Bob. And so I think we should be a little careful about looking at the public maps as like this strong input, because there doesn't seem to be any kind of controls. And I know we have historically some very organized populations of Los Altos citizens who like to get together. And so we have no way of knowing if one person submitted 25 different maps or liked 25 things at the same time. And so just be careful that I don't think there's any kind of controls in place for that right now. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so on the question of how many council members we need to have.
We're a general law city, so we have 5 council
Okay.
members. And if
Yeah.
we were charter, we could have 5 or 7 or more, but.
And are we allowed to draw districts that have more than one council member from the district?
As a general matter, no. As a general matter, no, because that would, in that district, they would be at large, and the CVRA disfavors anything at large.
With respect to the question of what are some of the things that one should be thinking about when evaluating maps, it's a great question that I think doesn't have an easy answer. Different things matter to different people. Someone who lives in the downtown triangle is going to be very interested in the flow of traffic down there, whereas someone who lives further away from downtown and doesn't go to downtown won't care about that so much. The council does there's a very broad scope of items over which we set policy and which city staff implement that policy. So as to what are the issues that really matter and should be used as a geographical guide for evaluating which map you think is best, every one of us is going to have to answer that individually. There's no easy answer to that. So that's the best I can do, and I'm sorry I can't give you. So the school districts, I think we've already identified that when drawing a map, you'll be able to hit a toggle switch that will show the school district boundaries.
But I think I'll try to interpret what the commenter was saying, which is, what is the city council doing? What projects or policies, et cetera, might the city do that would impact the schools and the school community?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a question which may have been more of a thought process, but it was phrased as a question, so I'll answer it, which was, will this impact voting for the school district members for any, and as the council is painfully aware, whatever we do has zero impact on any other government agency, so it won't change anything for the school districts, for the county supervisors, for the water board, et cetera. It'll just be for the council.
And then I can tell you that because of the pinch in the middle of the city, it's going to be very difficult to keep your particular neighborhood together with the rest of the Cupertino Union School District. I think there is a very compelling argument to try to keep that district together as much as possible. But because districts have to be contiguous and because there's a bulge at the bottom of the city, it's challenging. And I'm saying that as someone who's worked on the map and I've tried to get that together. It's something that I think you should advocate for, but it's as you can see on the maps, it's going to be a struggle.
Well, that's where I started, but maybe it's not a compelling argument. Maybe because we vote for our school district members separately, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm just not sure. That's why I'm kind of asking you guys, does it matter? Maybe all of us should stop worrying about school districts because we have another person we vote for that topic. But if there was a project, like the gentleman mentioned, if there was a project I'm not aware of that does have something to do with schools or something, then I would care. But I just don't know what types of things you guys vote on that have anything related or tangential to schools on the agenda. You see what I'm saying?
I think I understand, and again, there's no easy answer to that. Safe routes to school matters. It's something that's in our Complete Streets Master Plan. If and when we go to districts, will council members who represent certain districts want to focus on the schools, the safe routes in their district at the expense of others? That's the big fear, and there's no answer to that. That has to do with the character of the people who are going to follow this council and are representing individual districts. Okay.
The next speaker is Steve Chesson.
Oh, wait, could we address the part about controls? Like, I wanted to make sure, like she suggested, someone can go in and then submit 25 maps. How do we make sure that someone's not doing that?
Right. So again, because you can submit anonymously, we don't necessarily know who draws which map. However, it will get filtered. So obviously, us as demographers, we're going to assess those maps to see if they follow the Fair Maps Act guidelines. And they have to be posted 7 days prior to the meeting, so the public has ample time to view any of the maps that were drawn. And the public will be able to assess which maps they like, and if they see any that they don't like, they can say, go on testimony and say, don't choose that map, please choose this map. That being said, you all are the final choice on these maps. So, and like I mentioned earlier, if there are people advocating for a map that is far more impactful than just submitting a map and then forgetting about it. So if we're going to get 20, 50 maps, the people who show up to advocate for those maps, that map is far more likely to continue onward versus submitting 1,000 and having that diluted.
Thank you. I think that helps to answer that for all of us.
Mr. Chessum?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and residents of Los Altos. My name is Steve Chesson. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform. I did an analysis of the maps to see how well they remedy the alleged CVRA violation as compared to a proportional solution. There's a bar chart in your packet that graphically illustrates what I'm about to say. It's the first bar chart. The best map for Asian Americans, Map A, gives a district with a 38.7% Asian American citizen voting age population, or CVAP. Since CVAP represents the pool of eligible voters, it is recognized as indicating the ability of a protected group to elect a candidate of choice or to influence the outcome of an election. Since it takes at least 50% of the vote to guarantee winning a seat, a CVAP of 38.7% is about 77% of the ability to elect a candidate of choice. That is what is called an influence district. The second best district on Map A has an Asian American CVAP of 29.4%, or about 59% of the ability to elect a candidate of choice. Compare that with a proportional remedy. I apologize for popping my peas. Proportional ranked choice voting, PRCV, lowers the threshold of election to 33.33% when 2 seats are up, and to 25% when 3 seats are up. The citywide Asian American CVAP is 28%. This is 84% of the ability to elect a candidate of choice when 2 seats are up, and 112% of the ability to elect a candidate of choice when 3 seats are up. That is, under citywide PRCV, if Asian Americans voted as a bloc, they would be guaranteed to elect a candidate of choice when 3 seats are up and have a lot more influence when 2 seats are up than the best district in the best map for them does. Of course, there is no requirement that you adopt the best map for Asian Americans. You could adopt the worst map and still be in the CVRA safe harbor. PRCV also eliminates the vote splitting problem that plurality-based district elections have when too many similar candidates run for office. If that were to happen, Asian Americans would not be able to influence the election of a candidate of choice, no matter which district map is adopted. In the packet is also a chart that shows how changing to district elections leads to a high proportion of uncontested elections, but I don't have time to go into that now. As for how to get to PRCV, putting a 2-article charter on the November 2026 ballot will get you there in 2028. But there are 2 possible paths to use PRCV in November 2026. The first is a stipulated judgment, but that is risky. It requires the agreement of Mr. Shankman's client. It assumes the Secretary of State won't object, and it assumes that the judgment can bind the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters to conduct that election for you. The second path, and I want to thank Mr. Steinley for making me think of it, is a district bill that explicitly gives Los Altos the authority to conduct a PRCV election in 2026. That would eliminate any possible objection by the Secretary of State or the Registrar of Voters. It would be more likely to pass the state legislature if Mr. Shankman's client supported it as well. I could even draft such a bill for you, as I did for Santa Clara County, when it decided it needed a district bill to give it the authority to implement ranked choice voting for county offices. That bill was AB 1227 and was signed into law last year. So my recommendation is at the end of this process to adopt a map, any map, so as to be immune from a CVARI lawsuit, and then run the numbers by Mr. Shankman to see if he's agreeable to a PRCV remedy, as that would be much better for his client. And then in December, ask either the assembly member or the state senator representing Los Altos to carry a district bill that would give you the authority to use PRCV in 2026, even as you work to put a 2-article charter on the 2026 ballot to let Los Altos use PRCV in 2028 and beyond. And I could help you draft that charter as well. And to answer Councilmember Meadows' question about population versus CVAP, districts must be population-based because you'd represent everyone in your district, even the children in that district who couldn't vote for you. And to respond to something that the city attorney said, general law cities can have 5 or 7 or 9 districts, or 4 or 6 or 8 districts with a separately elected mayor. I refer her to Government Code Section 34871. A charter city could do what a member of the public suggested, have 3 districts where 2 districts elect 1 member every 2 years, and the 3rd district elects 1 member every 4 years, but that would have to be a charter city. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I'll check that government code section, but I think that is for counties. But I'll check.
Can I ask him,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chesson, if you don't mind coming back up? So you talked really fast. I didn't get a chance to look at the information in depth that you sent as public comment. So can you explain, you kept referring to how the PRCV would increase the percent of ability to elect.
That is correct.
And I didn't really understand, what is the percent of ability to elect?
Okay.
How do you come up with that?
Right. You basically take the CVAP number and you divide it by the threshold of election. How many votes, what percentage do you need to win a seat? In a single member district, although if there's a lot of people running and it's plurality, you can win with less than 50% of the vote. 50% is what guarantees that you can be elected, no matter how many other people run. So if you take that best district, which had 38.7% Asian American CVAP, and you divide that by 50%, you basically double that. You get about 37.4%. So that's how far you are to that 100% of the threshold that you need to be elected. Now, for a proportional solution, proportional representation works by lowering the threshold of election needed to win a seat. When 2 people are being elected, you don't require that they each get half the vote to win. You only require that they each get 1 more than a third of the vote to win. So that sets the threshold of election at 33 1/3%. If we take the citywide CVAP of Asian Americans in Los Altos, which is about 28%, and divide that by 33 1/3%, you now have 84%, or 84% of the way, much more influence of electing somebody. And when there are 3 seats up, the threshold of election is now 25%. If you divide 28% by 25%, now you're at 112%. So they could definitely, voting as a block, elect a candidate of choice, no matter how everybody else in the city voted, and still have some left over, 12%, to influence the election of a second. So basically you would have Asian Americans, that protected group, guaranteed to win a seat every 4 years and have good influence on electing another person in the other 4 years, in the other cycle. Much better than any district map that you could draw.
Well, I appreciate you explaining it because I didn't really understand what it was and how you arrived at it. Now I do, at least for 5 minutes. I might forget it later, and I'll be in touch then. So
feel free to email
yes,
or call
thank
me if you have any
Okay,
questions. Thank
all
you
right.
very much.
Okay, I think I have an answer to that question. So the general rule is for general law cities have 5 council members. And if the city electors wish to propose an ordinance, they can have a different number of council members. So it would have to be a voter initiative to have more.
Okay.
More than 5. That's what I found.
Thank you. Who's our next speaker?
The next speaker is Freddie Wheeler.
How many more speakers do we have? Speaker cards do you have?
3.
Okay. Could
The next speaker is Freddie Wheeler.
Hi, hello. Just a comment about where I live. I live in Highlands, and it's the western part on the western side of Foothill. On all of the maps, my neighborhood, all of Highlands, is in a district that contains Foothill crossings, that area. Yet, I do so much more business with Loyola Corners and Rancho. So I basically have almost no connection to Foothill crossing area. The other question I have, I mean, I moved here 30 years ago in January, but my kids were grown, so I really never paid any attention to school districts, other than I do know I live in the Cupertino School District. Why do we live in the why is that part of Los Altos in the Cupertino School District? Why don't we move to the Los Altos School District? Then we wouldn't have that problem. I'm sure there's a very good reason, but I'm just throwing that out there. And then
so the answer to the question is that the school districts formed before the cities did. If you want to leave one district and be annexed by another, that has to be done through the school. It makes all the sense in the world to me. But again, the answer is that the cities and the school districts did not form at the same time. And then when the cities started to form, people decided that they wanted to be with different communities as opposed to where the school districts are.
But theoretically, those of us who live in Los Altos, in the Cupertino School District, we could somehow organize to ask that we be transferred to Los Altos School District? It
would be the same way that anyone would want to leave one city and be annexed by another. It doesn't happen very often anymore. Usually there's unincorporated areas that get annexed. That's often for reasons that have to do with sewers. That's not applicable here. But there is a process. The answer is yes, there is a process. You would have to get Cupertino Union to agree and Los Altos to agree. And I don't know if there's a vote that's required, but there is a process, but it's not. I personally would support it. I suspect most of the council would, if not all the council, but it's not something that can be done legislatively by the council.
Okay, but it is maybe something that could be done. The other just point I want to make is that maybe we should make it known that drawing the maps isn't just like fun, because I drew 2 maps, not having any idea that anybody would put any thought into them. Okay, so maybe if this is not coloring time would be a good message. Thank you.
The next speaker is Janine Valadez.
Hello, Janine Valadez, member of the Park Commission, not here in that capacity. I have a silly technical question, and then I just want to make a general comment. The silly technical question is on the total population in district, or the total population shaded when you want to shade by total population. The units on the bar that show the population intensity, I'm assuming those numbers apply to a census block. That's one assumption, so I need to be corrected if I'm wrong. And then the second thing related to that is, I'm assuming the numbers are heads, are persons. My comment is going to depend on the answers to those.
So when it comes to, is it the census blocks that it's shading? Yes, it's shading all of the census blocks. I'm happy to talk to you after this meeting and we can go over districtor and, answer your questions. And then the next,
so like the darkest block was 1,300. Is that 1,300 people?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So my comment has to do with, there are a lot of people that own homes in this city that don't live in them, and I wondered how that issue is being addressed. They might be rented. They might allow friends to stay there. They might be empty. I want to know how that plays into the demographics in terms of the census, in terms of the Voting Rights Act, and then also just how we draw maps. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when it comes to, homeowners, renters, really what the census is counting is who's living in your city at the time of April 1st, 2020. So it doesn't matter if you're a homeowner or renter, they're going to count you living in that census block. That being said, we can look into the different populations within the city. So if you want us to, we can show you a heat map of where the renters are and where the homeowners are. That is often used in many city districtings and redistrictings. It usually shows sociological divides, if there are any. It's at least enlightening to know if there's a difference. So that's one thing that I can show to you guys next time if that's helpful, if you think so.
What other heat maps do you have available?
So any kind of demographics you're interested in. Another very common heat map that we provide includes income levels. So if there's usually unequal wealth distribution, it's good to know where the more affluent areas are and underserved areas are. So that's one thing. Another thing we looked at recently is different health levels. So asthma reports that we got the data from the state. So that's one level, but that was a jurisdiction in the East Bay where they're surrounded by freeways. So that was particularly of interest to them. So if there's an issue within the city that you can think of, we could probably create a heat map out of that.
I was using the rental thing as a proxy for potential.
The next speaker is Larry Lang.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lang.
Good afternoon, Council. Good to see you again. I'm with Freddie on many things, but in this particular one, this notion that what's going on is important. The way I perceived the tool was as almost a plaything to educate yourself. Yes. Right? If I was forced to write something in, I would have written in, "This sure reminds me of playing Risk," and that was fun. Right? But I did learn some things doing it. One thing I say is give up on the school district thing. Right, the difference between the school district and the city is too much. There's parts that bulge out to Mountain View. There's a whole unincorporated area. They're so not the same. I tried to do that for a while because I have a friend who works for the registrar of voters, and one of the things we're doing here is blowing up the combinatorics of different ballots yet again. Right, so many different kind of ballots, but it can't be helped. The one other thing two other things. One other thing would be one thing that I do think would be actually useful would be infrastructure, notably things like sewer lines, right? People who live along a sewer line actually have a community of interest. They may not know it till things go wrong, but then they will have a big, strong shared interest. We're dealing with that a little in the neighborhood. So some of those things might actually be more relevant for city representation than the school districts. And the last thing I'll say is, as I played with it, one thing that I might think might be useful is not just, do you like this map or do you like that map better, but begin to crystallize it. And do you think Rancho should be in this district or that district, right? And to questions, either or questions, a list of probably a dozen will emerge, would be my guess, as we wrestle with this. For the record, I don't like the districting at all, but you do the best you can.
Thank you.
I have no other speaker cards.
Thank you. Is there anyone who has not spoken yet that would like to make a comment? I think I've seen almost everyone in the audience has already spoken. I'm sure that the comments that you've heard and the answers that you've gotten from staff has probably piqued even more questions. I invite anyone who has additional questions or comments or ideas to continue to participate. Obviously, you can go through the portal that we have online, or you can just send an email to the entire city council. It's very easy to do that. I think it's what, city council at losaltosca.gov. That's one way to hit all 5 council members right away. And your question will also go to staff, and staff will include it with all the other data that we are collecting with respect to districting. So,
Mayor.
thank you to everyone in the audience who has given comment. Yes, ma'am.
Just quick correction. It's just council at losaltosca.gov.
Okay. Council at losaltosca.gov. Thank you. Okay. With that, I will go ahead and bring it back to council. Councilmember Liang, you want to get us started?
Knowing that there are separate health or heat maps, I think it's important to understand like the health maps. I know for South Los Altos, we're highly impacted by Lehigh. So I'd like to see to understand that map better. So that'll be important for me to see what other health issues that we need to be aware of and to have that understood. So thank you for sharing that information regarding the heat maps. But I thought today was very helpful, and I think the input was great, and people sharing all their concerns as well is appreciated. And I hope we continue to encourage all your friends to attend all the events that we have scheduled. So please help us spread the word of these events coming up. Thank you.
Councilmember Flagger?
I'll hold what I was going to say, Mayor. So yes, thank you so much for the presentation, and I agree with Councilmember Liang. I thought today's meeting was very informative and productive, so I really appreciate all the work that went into this meeting. Just comments on what we've heard, and I'll just start with the suggestion from Mr. Lang. I like that idea of when we do these workshops, Mr. Maginot, to have questions that will prompt people to think about things, right? Because we're all new to this, and so I think they need to understand the type of information we need. And so having these prompt questions, I think will help to get the better feedback and information we need. So I do support having more questions to prompt our residents. On the heat maps, the socioeconomic divide, I'd be interested in seeing that. My reason is I want to make sure that that's distributed throughout the city, throughout the districts. And that's just my personal preference, as opposed to trying to put, those households maybe in their own district. So I would be curious to see that kind of heat map. Going back to some of the comments, which I also supported at the last meeting, if it's possible to have similar to what we're talking about with the school district. And I know some people are in favor of the school districts and some people are against using the school districts as a criteria. I think as we go through this process, it's one of the factors we should still be considering regardless of where we end up. And so for me, in addition to the school districts, it's the parks, it's the 7 business districts. And for me, we talk about being a, climate friendly community. We want kids to bike and ride and all these things. And so, being able to have in every district a business district that's 1 mile within that district of all the residents, for me, that would be important if it's possible. So I would love to see on the map or in the tool a way to see where, when we draw those 5 districts, each district would have at least one of our business districts. And I appreciate what Ms. Wheeler said about she identifies and visits the Rancho Shopping Center and the Loyola Corners area more than she does with the Foothill Plaza. So those are, because I know it's important to a lot of residents, they all identify with their own business district. And so I think it's important for people to see that as well. Thanks, Mr. Steinley, for your comment about the east side of El Camino. maybe different from the west side of El Camino. You know, I can argue the other way why El Camino should be kept as one district, but this is part of the process, learning from individuals who actually live in that area why they believe it's different. So I really appreciated hearing that east-west divide. And the horizontal versus vertical, it's interesting that the 3 draft maps that you presented actually took that approach. And I understand maybe it's the 4th priority where we do encourage using these main thoroughfares. But was it based on the 11 public maps that were distributed, why you took this approach as well? Where you went along Foothill and San Antonio, because it does model the same, to Mr. Steinley's point, they all model that same approach. And so I was curious, was it based on the public comment maps that were submitted, or was there a reason why you, in your professional capacity, thought that was the better approach as well?
Just looking at trends, it was clear that people were using those roads as dividers. So wanted to see how I could make it as clean as possible while still using it as a divider, and then providing you with different options. So the horizontal option, was it like map B or map C, where it was, it didn't use San Antonio as a divider. So it showed you a different option.
Okay. And then the last point that I remember from the the last meeting, different parts of Los Altos have a different feel, and I know you're not that familiar with Los Altos, but there are parts that have a more rural feel, which the residents want to keep that way. And so I think that for me should be part of I don't think there's a big enough neighborhood to create a district, but keeping those neighborhoods together, because to the point the resident made about what issues that go before council that I would want to band together with my neighbors to advocate for. I know those residents, they want to make sure there are no street lights, there are no sidewalks, they like the rural feel. And so I can see them banding together and want to be part of the same district when we draw these maps. So that's something I know was raised at the last meeting, which I understood. It's not a big enough number of residents, but it's something to consider as part of the criteria. But thank you again. I think that's where I am. I imagine that this feedback you're getting, you're going to develop more maps. You hear the points we're making, and we'll get that kind of information, because for me, getting all these data points will help me make better proposals about what the district should be. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Mayor?
One of the things I noticed in the voter registration data is that our median age by precinct is actually pretty high relative to other jurisdictions, but within our community, it varies from approximately 58 to 68. So there are certainly at least voting precincts where we have a higher population of more seasoned residents. And if we can heat map that, I would be very interested in that, because I do find that age as a particular demographic characteristic tends to correlate to shared interest often.
We can definitely do that.
I would
we'll get you
very
a
much
map
like to see that.
with age too.
That's all I have right now.
Councilmember Matos?
All right. Good news is I'm less cranky now. So thank you, everybody, for a very constructive discussion. City manager looks relieved. So I like the idea of, well, so first of all, when we get this next, please, for me, it was a little hard to just hear some of these numbers rather than have them coming into the meeting. So if that total deviation number is important, please include it so we can see it as we consider the maps. So that's the first thing. Then another, I like the idea of age. I like the idea of looking at the business districts. I mean, some of the 7 are smaller, and so maybe there's 5 key ones that people want to be able to walk to rather than 7. Again, I'm not as familiar with there, I don't need to belabor that, but I do think we need to explore that. I wondered whether it would make sense to overlay the where the housing element will take us. Because if you recall, at the zoning's been redrawn, now we have no control over whether anything is developed, but think about Andronicos. We've already talked about Andronicos today, but Andronicos tomorrow or Lucky's tomorrow. So maybe look at some of the pockets at how we've done the rezoning and how we committed to do it in the housing element and see how that might impact the communities. Because we certainly aren't going to want to have to draw districts every decade or something that, we don't even want to do it now, much less every 10 years. So I think we should take that as sort of a forward-looking perspective so we can maybe build a little bit of the future-proofing in. So I spoke earlier about, and I don't know if anybody else did this, but I took these 3 starting points and I tried to compare, and I got thrown off by different colors in different districts, but I tried to compare. And of course, you all don't have to map what happens to my house, but what we want to do is really understand, let's say we're looking at Andronicos and compare some of the maps. What happens to the Andronicos area in the next map A and map B and map C? Because I don't think we were given much to understand about this. Now, it turns out that's because we really didn't have community of interest. We just had roads. But the next maps should have more built in. So I want to be able to look at if one map is built around these shopping areas, whether it's 5 or 7, I want to look at Andronicos in each of those and then understand what's happening in the changes. So you're showing us A versus B versus C, but I want to do a different cut of the data. I want to look at let's call it the middle district, and see what it looks like comparing middle district only to itself in A and B and C. Mm-hmm. So it's the other side of the matrix. And actually I shared with the city manager how I was attempting to look at my neighborhood to see if I could make any sense of what was happening. And the answer was no, but that's okay. I think the next maps will be very useful. So I think that's really it, but I don't think we're just comparing this whole thing. This is what I'm trying to say. It's not this whole thing to this whole thing to the third whole thing. It's taking the pink area and all the scenarios and understanding why it's looking different and what's driving it and which is better. I think that is the level we need to get to in order to be able to make decisions that make sense for the community.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to see the health heat map, the age heat map. I'd like to see renters versus homeowners heat map. I'd like to see a socioeconomic heat map. I think all of those would be useful to the community and to all of us here. Thank you very much for the work that has been done so far. I want to get to a sort of a higher level, make some higher level statements, but first, granularly, one thing that has always bothered me, well, there's a lot of things that bother me about the process, but specifically, because the city has the pinch in the middle, the south part of the city is going to get 2 districts, and then the northern part of the city is going to get 3. And there's no way around that. I mean, there's some either ors. Fred, Ms. Wheeler, I appreciate I had no idea that people in the Highlands really don't go to Foothills Crossings. So I had always thought that it would make sense to put them together. If it's just, it's either going to go with Grant Park or it's going to go with the Highlands, or they're all going to be one. That's the only way to do it. But learning these things is extremely important. At the lower level, with respect to the southern part of the city, if Councilmember Liang's suggestion is adopted and we try to keep the Cupertino Union School District together, it means that either the Highlands or Grant Park is not going to be able to be kept together because it will be too large of a district. And Elizabeth, I know that you don't know the neighborhoods yet, but I'll say this to John. I mean, my colleagues may feel differently. I have a very hard time finding a justification to vote for a map that divides either of those neighborhoods. But if both of those neighborhoods are going to stay intact, it means that they're going to have to be in different districts. So that's my 2 cents for that. moving out to a higher level, I will look to my colleagues and I want to say this, that this is about to get much, much harder for us. Right now, we've got some talking points. Maps A, B, and C were never intended to be, here are the final choices to make. They're the starting points, they're the talking points, and we've seen some of those tonight. When we come back for our fourth meeting, at that point, we're going to have to start making some very, very difficult decisions. And it's important that we get back the feedback that we're getting here and that we're going to continue to get from the public. But the reality is this. There are very few people in the city that know Los Altos the way that we do. There are some, but the vast majority of the people that are drawing maps and contributing, they're being done to be helpful and to express their desires, but we're the ones that really know the city. And we're going to have to start thinking in ways that maybe the average resident isn't. So for instance, a lot of the city's resources go to downtown and a lot of them go to the Civic Center. Do we want those two neighborhoods, for lack of a communities, what do you want to call it? Do you want to put those together or do you want to separate them? Those are the type of questions that I believe most residents are not thinking about. But those are the types of things that I think we need to start thinking about because that's going to, the effect of how we answer that sort of a question is really going to affect how the city is governed 5 years, 10 years down the road, because we won't be here anymore. It will be 5 council members who are elected by individual districts. And I don't know if it's good to have them together, but we need to think about what the motivations will be for a council member who has both of those, or maybe separating them so they're in between 2 separate districts. That's just one example. I think there's a lot more things like that are going to come up throughout the whole city. Again, we have sort of insight into how the city runs, and we're going to have to start using that inside baseball knowledge in shaping how we're going to go forward. Nobody wants to be here. Nobody wants to do this. We're going to end up with maps that some people really hate. And it's difficult because none of us like to do that. But that's simply the reality. There are going to be competing interests, and we're not going to be able to make everyone happy. Another thing that I would like to invite my colleagues to begin thinking about is the question of which districts are going to be up for, which 2 districts will be up for re-election in not re-election, but for election in 2026, and which 3 in 2028. To the extent that redistricting partners or our council or staff or anyone could give us best practices, criteria that are often used to try to make that type of a decision, I would find it useful. I don't know. I know that you can tell us what we can't consider, and you've already done that, and we need to continue to keep that in mind. But right now, the districts that are going to be up during presidential elections are probably going to get better turnout. Is that a factor that should control which districts are going to be up for election in 2020? I don't know. But these are the type of things that the council is going to have to tussle with. So if there's some kind of a primer that staff can give, not just to the council, but the community as well, I think that would be extremely useful. And of course, this is another issue that if you, as members of the public, have comment on, if you have thoughts about, let us know, because we want to hear from you on that as well. I think that's about it. I really want to thank Elizabeth from Redistricting Partners for coming down here. John, thank you for introducing us to your best friend. Larry, I'm disappointed we didn't hear about bounty hunters tonight, but there'll always be another opportunity. For those of you who weren't here last night, that was a joke that was made last night that I'm following up on. But I really appreciate that members of the public have come here. I appreciate that the press is here. Mr. Chessum, I appreciate that you are here. However, I'm going to decline your offer to just pass any map. I understand what you are advocating for it. I'm not necessarily against it, but we are not just going to pass any map. We are going to pass a map that the majority of the council thinks is in the best interest of the city. You're laying out a plan for us, which we may or may not adopt. Even if we adopt it, there's no assurances. So we're not just going to adopt any map. We're going to adopt the best map that we possibly can, because we need to believe that that's how Los Altos is going to look, at least until 2030 and maybe for years beyond. With that, Madam City Attorney.
Yep, I don't want to get into a big giant debate, but again, and I'll send you a memo about this. We're a general law city and we start with 5 council members. If we would want to go to more as a general law city, this is council members, this is not districts. We would have to go out for an ordinance adopted by the electors. And well, that would be, yeah. And so then not 348, not 866, but 34886. You can go to districts by ordinance, not a vote, but that's districts by an ordinance. And that's what we will be doing in October.
Okay.
So there was a little bit of a confusion there. But if we didn't go to districts and for some reason you wanted to change the number of council members, not districts, that would need a vote.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And that's just like a vote of the mayor.
The issue before the council is districting. We've adopted a resolution that says that we are going to adopt districts by October 31st. We're going to go ahead and continue that process. That's what today is about. That's what our next 2 districting meetings will be about. Thank you. So other than that, is there anything else from staff? Okay, again, thank you all. I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned. That does not mean that the issue is done. It does not mean that we don't still want to hear from you. So thank you for your continuing participation. With that, we are adjourned.